My name is Melissa. I'm 33 years old, and the night my mother shattered my world still plays in my head like a broken record. Imagine sitting at a restaurant you booked months in advance, every detail carefully chosen, every dollar saved poured into making it perfect, only for the person you love most to raise a glass smile at everyone around you and say the best gift you could ever give me is to leave my life for good. That was my mother's birthday toast. Not a thank you, not a memory, a declaration that my existence was a burden. The room fell silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence, and I felt the air leave my chest like I'd been punched. My gift box, the one I had been clutching under the table, something I'd hunted down for months, something I thought might finally bring her real joy, suddenly felt ridiculous in my hand. Everyone's eyes darted to me then away as if they were afraid to catch the fallout. And me, I stood there frozen, staring at the woman who had spent her life reminding me I was never enough. She was smiling, but it wasn't kindness. It was relief, like she had finally spoken the truth she'd been waiting to unload for decades. I don't remember leaving the table. I don't remember the walk through the crowded dining room or the cold night air that hit my face. What I do remember is the sound of my own heart pounding so loudly it drowned everything else out. That was the moment I realized something undeniable. I had spent 33 years rearranging my life around a woman who never once rearranged hers for me. 33 years trying to buy approval that would never come, trying to mold myself into someone she might finally love. And in one public sentence, she made it clear she didn't want me at all. When I got into my car that night, I didn't cry, not the way people expect with heaving sobs and tissues. Instead, tears slid silently down my face, as if my body knew something my mind hadn't yet caught up to. This was an ending. Not of a dinner, not of a celebration gone wrong, but of a life I could no longer live. And then somewhere in that heavy silence, a strange calm came over me. For the first time I thought, what if I gave her what she asked for? What if disappearing wasn't defeat, but freedom? I gripped the steering wheel and whispered to myself, maybe it's time to vanish. That night was the hook that set everything in motion, the unraveling of decades of silent suffering, the beginning of a story not about abandonment, but about survival, about finally choosing myself over the approval I'd never get. So when people ask me when my life truly began, I don't tell them about my childhood or college or my first job. I tell them about that dinner, about the moment my mother wished me gone, and I decided to grant her wish not out of obedience but out of defiance. Because sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself is to walk away from the person who taught you to hate who you are. Growing up, I used to believe our family was the picture of perfection. From the outside, it looked that way. We lived in a beautiful colonial-style home on a tree-lined street in a quiet Connecticut suburb. The lawn was always trimmed, the shutters painted the flower beds blooming in colors that made neighbors pause as they walked by. My mother Evelyn made sure of that. She wanted everyone in town to look at our house and think there's the family to admire. But inside those walls, it was different. Behind the polished doors and magazine-worthy garden, there was a constant hum of criticism, a voice that never quieted. That voice was hers. Evelyn was the queen of appearances, the kind of woman who could smile warmly at a stranger while cutting me to pieces with a single glance. Melissa, stand up straight. You look sloppy. Melissa, that dress makes you look pudgy. Change into something decent. Why can't you be more like Hannah? She just won another scholarship. Hannah was my older sister, the golden child. She was smart-driven and everything my mother wanted. Every report card of hers was paraded like a trophy, every achievement praised at dinner tables, every compliment from neighbors accepted as Evelyn's personal success. Meanwhile, I lived in Hannah's shadow, constantly reminded that I was the less than, the disappointment, the one who needed fixing. The strange part, our neighbors never saw it. To them, Evelyn was a role model, a president of the garden club, a fundraiser for the local hospital, the woman who hosted perfect tea parties with crystal glasses and homemade scones. They saw a polished woman with perfect blonde hair, a graceful smile, and designer suits. I saw the woman who could dismantle my self-worth with 3 words, not good enough. I spent my childhood trying to earn crumbs of her approval. Every art project I brought home she dismissed as clutter. Every performance I gave in school plays she either skipped or criticized afterward. The only one who softened the blows was my father. He was a gentle doctor, a man who never raised his voice. After my mother's barbs, he'd slip into my room late at night, sit on the edge of my bed and say, "She just wants the best for you, sweetheart." But even then, I could see it in his eyes. He knew it was more than that. He knew she wanted perfection, not me. When he died suddenly of a heart attack, I was 16. That was the first and last time I ever saw my mother cry. And once his funeral was over, the fragile buffer that had protected me from the worst of her cruelty was gone. Without him, the storm hit me full force. "You're getting fat, Melissa. No man will want you if you can't control yourself. Why are you wasting time drawing? That's not a career. Hannah is going places and you'll end up cleaning her floors if you're not careful." I was barely 120 pounds at the time. I was a straight A student. But in her eyes, everything about me was flawed. And slowly I started believing it. Even in moments that should have been mine, Hannah overshadowed me. When I was accepted into a state art competition, she barely glanced at the certificate. But when Hannah closed her first deal at her finance job in New York, my mother sent holiday cards bragging about it to the entire neighborhood. Living in that house felt like living under a microscope. Every move examined, every choice compared, every dream dismissed. And yet I kept trying. I kept folding myself into smaller and smaller versions, hoping that if I just adjusted the right way, she might finally look at me and say, "I'm proud of you." That moment never came. And maybe deep down, that's why her birthday toast years later hit me so hard. Because I wasn't just hearing her say she wanted me gone at 65. I was hearing every "not enough," every "why can't you be more like your sister," every "you'll never measure up" that had been stitched into me since childhood. That dinner didn't break me. It confirmed what I had known all along. I was never going to be enough for her. But here's the thing I want you to think about. Have you ever lived under someone else's impossible expectations? Have you ever bent yourself in half trying to please someone who was never going to be pleased? If you have, tell me in the comments how you dealt with it. Did you ever find a way to break free? I'd love to hear your stories. And if you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible in your own family, don't forget to hit subscribe, because this space is for you, for us, for everyone who's ever been overlooked. Because my story isn't just about being unwanted. It's about what happens when you finally stop begging for approval and start writing your own script. And that's exactly what I had to learn the hard way. When people ask me who my anchor was growing up, I always say my father. His name was David, and he was the one soft place in a house built out of sharp edges. While my mother's voice sliced me apart day after day, he was the one who stitched me back together, even if only temporarily. He was a small-town doctor, the kind who knew every patient's birthday and remembered the names of their children. He wasn't flashy or loud, but he had a kindness that filled a room without him ever raising his voice. After every cutting remark from my mother, I could count on the gentle knock on my bedroom door later that night. He would step inside, sit quietly on the edge of my bed, and say something simple. "She just wants the best for you." I knew he didn't believe it. His eyes told me so. His eyes said, "I'm sorry she's like this. I wish I could protect you more." Sometimes he would hold up a drawing I had worked on, one my mother had dismissed as scribbles, and tell me it was beautiful. He would tack it to the wall of his office where patients could see it, as though to remind me, "Your work matters, even if she says it doesn't." Those small acts were lifelines. They gave me hope that maybe I wasn't broken. Maybe I wasn't the failure my mother insisted I was. But hope is fragile. And at 16, mine was ripped away. It happened suddenly. One morning, he kissed me on the forehead before heading to work. That afternoon, a nurse from the hospital called. A heart attack. He was gone before I could even say goodbye. The day we buried him was the only day I ever saw my mother's mask slip. She cried at the graveside, her perfectly styled hair damp with rain, her shoulders shaking as if she had lost more than a husband, perhaps the only person who had ever softened her. But after that, the tears dried. The wall went back up. And with my father gone, there was nothing left to buffer me from her full force. The cruelty escalated overnight. Where once there had been backhanded comments, now there were direct assaults. "You're getting fat, Melissa. No man will want you. You'll never make it as an artist, you're wasting time. You'll end up depending on Hannah to take care of you." I was 5'6", barely 120 pounds, but she said it so often I started pinching the skin on my stomach in the mirror, convinced she must be right. My grades stayed high, but every time I brought home an A, she reminded me Hannah had already been doing better at my age. There was no victory, no space to breathe, just the constant reminder that I was inadequate. And yet, I couldn't walk away. I was 16. I didn't have the power, the money, or the courage to fight back. So I stayed shrinking smaller, trying to survive each day until I could get out. Looking back, I think losing my father didn't just take away the person who loved me most. It also took away the version of me that still believed my mother might change. Without him, I stopped expecting approval. I stopped hoping. I just endured. That endurance shaped me in ways I didn't understand until much later. It taught me to be silent when I wanted to scream, to smile when I wanted to cry, to pretend everything was fine, so no one would guess how broken things were at home. From the outside, I was just another quiet teenager in Lakeside. Inside, I was fighting a battle every single day with the woman who was supposed to love me most. And maybe that's why when she raised her glass on her birthday years later and told me the best gift would be for me to leave her life, I didn't collapse right there at the table. Because deep down, I had been preparing for that moment since the day my father died. Sometimes I wonder what he would have said if he had lived longer. Would he have told me to fight back, to cut ties earlier? Or would he have tried to keep patching me together with his quiet reassurances, hoping I could withstand her storms forever? I'll never know. But what I do know is this: his absence forced me to face the raw truth of who my mother was. And it set the stage for the next chapter, the one where I had to decide whether to keep sacrificing myself for her approval or to finally choose freedom. By the time I reached college, I thought I'd finally escaped her grip. Moving 2 states away to attend art school in Vermont felt like breaking through a cage door that had been bolted shut my whole life. For the first time, no one was breathing down my neck about my weight, my clothes, or how I stacked up to Hannah. For the first time, I could just be Melissa. But of course, freedom came with strings. My mother paid part of my tuition, and with that came her voice seeping into every phone call, every holiday visit. Are you wasting time painting again? Hannah is already earning real money. Don't think moving away makes you independent. You still rely on me. And my personal favorite: if you ever expect me to respect you, you need to prove you can be successful. Otherwise, you're just embarrassing yourself. At school, I was thriving. Professors encouraged my work. Classmates admired my sketches. And for the first time, I could envision a future where art wasn't just a hobby, but a career. Yet every time I hung up the phone with her, I felt like that little girl again, the one staring into a mirror, pulling at imaginary flaws. Hannah, of course, was soaring. She landed a high-paying finance job in New York City, complete with a corner office view and designer suits that made my mother glow with pride. Whenever I came home for breaks, the house was filled with talk of Hannah's promotions, Hannah's new apartment, Hannah's future husband. My own milestones barely registered. When I won a regional award for my work in oil painting, my mother called it cute. When Hannah closed a major account at work, my mother sent out a family newsletter. It wasn't jealousy, it was erasure, and it hurt more than I could ever admit at the time. College should have been my sanctuary, but her voice followed me everywhere. I started doubting myself again, working twice as hard, staying up late in the studio until my hands cramped. No matter how many hours I put in, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was already behind, already losing in a race I never chose to run. I dated briefly, but even there her influence crept in. The first boy I brought home, she sized him up and later told me, "He's not good enough. You can do better." The irony burned coming from the woman who had never once told me I was good enough. And then came the ultimate reminder, her 65th birthday dinner. The evening was supposed to be a celebration. The whole family gathered at an upscale restaurant in Hartford. The lighting was warm, the silverware polished, the kind of place where the servers addressed you as ma'am. I remember feeling a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe this would be the night she looked at me differently. Maybe after years of being her disappointment, I'd finally done enough to stand tall in her eyes. When the cake arrived, she stood glass in hand. I expected some sentimental toast about family, about gratitude, maybe even a rare compliment. Instead, she looked directly at me and said, "The best birthday present you could give me is to leave my life. Just disappear." The table went silent. I felt every pair of eyes on me, Hannah's included, but no one said a word. My face burned, my hands trembled, but I forced myself to swallow the lump in my throat. She had humiliated me publicly in front of everyone with the same casual cruelty she'd practiced my whole life. But in that silence, something shifted. For the first time, I didn't beg for approval. I didn't shrink. I didn't even cry. I just looked at her and thought, "You've finally said out loud what you've been saying all along." That night, as I lay awake in my apartment, I realized her words had cut me free, more than they had hurt me. She wanted me gone. Then maybe it was time I finally left her behind. Not just physically, but emotionally. I didn't know how yet. I didn't know if I was strong enough. But I knew one thing: I couldn't keep living my life on the edge of her approval. And that thought, that tiny spark, was the beginning of everything that came after. After that night, I carried her words like a brand burned into my skin. The best gift you can give me is to leave my life. For weeks, I replayed the scene in my head, the clinking of glasses, the weight of silence, the way Hannah avoided my eyes, as though she were embarrassed for me but unwilling to step in. At first, I did what I had always done. I internalized the pain. I told myself I'd misheard, that maybe she hadn't meant it literally, that I was overreacting. But every time I called home, her tone left no doubt. Short-clipped, dismissive. I was no longer her daughter, I was her burden. So I tried the only strategy I thought might earn her back, achieving more. I poured myself into art like it was a survival strategy. While my classmates took weekends off, I lived in the studio. My professors called me relentless, but they didn't know I wasn't chasing excellence, I was chasing scraps of love. I entered contests, applied for grants, and forced myself to work until my vision blurred. When I won a state-level art competition my junior year, I thought, this is it. She'll be proud. I sent her the announcement, a photo of me holding the certificate. Her reply came 2 days later. Cute. But don't forget, Hannah's firm just landed a multi-million-dollar client. That's real success. It was a dagger dressed as a sentence. I remember sitting in my dorm room that night, staring at the email, trying to make sense of how a mother could so effortlessly erase her own child's achievements. Tears came hot and fast, but underneath them, another emotion was stirring: anger. For years I had swallowed the humiliation, but something inside me was changing. Each slight, each dismissal was no longer crushing me. It was stacking like firewood, building toward an inevitable blaze. Around that time, Hannah and I started drifting even further apart. She wasn't cruel, but she didn't challenge our mother either. When I asked her once why she never defended me, she sighed and said, "Melissa, it's not worth the fight. Just ignore her." Easy for her to say. She was the golden child, the one who had never been told to disappear. Still, Hannah's silence hurt almost as much as my mother's words. It confirmed what I had always feared, that I was on my own in this battle. And maybe that's why I started telling my story to others, quietly, carefully. In late-night conversations with friends in the art studio, I admitted the truth. My mother didn't just criticize me, she actively wanted me gone. I watched their faces tighten in disbelief, then sympathy. "Melissa," one friend said, "that's emotional abuse. You know that, right?" The words landed like a revelation. Abuse. It wasn't just me being oversensitive. It wasn't just a difficult mother. It was deliberate, systematic cruelty. And giving it that name gave me something I had never had before: validation. That validation gave me courage. One afternoon, I recorded myself speaking about my experiences, just me, a shaky voice, and the raw truth of growing up under her shadow. I never intended to share it, but listening back, I realized how powerful it was to hear my own voice name the pain. And here's where I pause, because I want to ask you, if you're listening right now, have you ever been made to feel invisible in your own family? Have you ever been told, directly or indirectly, that you don't belong? If you have, leave a comment below. I want to know your story, because I know how lonely that silence can feel. That moment, reaching outward instead of shrinking inward, marked the start of my transformation. No, I didn't cut ties right away. No, I didn't suddenly become fearless. But I began to see her cruelty for what it was, not what she claimed it to be. And that shift in perspective was everything. Because once you recognize abuse, you can't unsee it. And once you speak it out loud, even to yourself, you begin to reclaim the power that was taken from you. I wasn't free yet, but I was no longer chained entirely to her approval. And that terrified her more than anything else. By the summer before my senior year, the tension had become unbearable. Every phone call with my mother left me shaken. Every holiday visit felt like walking into a battlefield. I kept telling myself, just one more year, Graduate, get out, and maybe then I'll finally be free. But she had other plans. One evening I received an envelope in the mail. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, elegant, my mother's. Inside was a letter folded with precision. I unfolded it slowly, already bracing myself. Melissa, it began, I have decided to update my will. You will not be included. Hannah has proven herself responsible, capable, and worthy. You unfortunately have chosen a frivolous path that I cannot support. Please do not embarrass yourself by arguing. This is final. I must have read it a dozen times. The words blurred, but the message was clear. I wasn't just unwanted in her daily life. I was being erased from her future, too. For a moment I sat frozen, staring at the paper like it might dissolve in my hands. But then the trembling started, followed by the tears. I called Hannah, desperate for some shred of solidarity. She answered on the second ring, her voice smooth as ever. Melissa, listen. You know how she is. Don't take it so personally. Not take it personally, I snapped. She just cut me out of her will. There was silence, then a sigh. She's always been clear about expectations. Maybe if you... I hung up before she could finish. That night, something inside me broke, but not in the way it used to. Instead of collapsing under her cruelty, I felt something else rise, defiance. If she wanted me gone, fine. But I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I started journaling obsessively, documenting every slight, every insult, every manipulation. The pages filled quickly as though my hand couldn't keep up with the flood of memories. Reading it back, I realized the truth. This wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate, calculated destruction. And in that realization, I found a new sense of strength. Around that time, one of my professors encouraged me to apply for a national art showcase in New York. It was competitive, he warned. Thousands of applicants, only a handful chosen. But something in me whispered, do it. Prove her wrong. So I did. I stayed up night after night, perfecting my portfolio, pouring every ounce of anger and longing into the canvas. When I mailed it off, my hands shook, not from fear, but from hope. Weeks later, an email arrived. Congratulations. You've been selected. For the first time in years, I laughed until I cried. It felt like the universe had reached down and whispered, you are enough. But here's the part that still stings. When I called home to share the news, my mother didn't even pretend to care. That's nice, she said flatly. But don't expect me to come watch. And that was when I knew no amount of success, no trophy, no exhibition would ever change her. She had built her identity on erasing mine, and nothing I did could rewrite that story for her. But I could rewrite it for myself. I want to pause here and ask you if you've ever felt the urge to keep chasing approval from someone who refuses to give it what stopped you, or are you still chasing? Tell me in the comments, because your story matters. And if this video resonates with you, consider subscribing. We've built a community here where voices like ours are finally heard. The letter, as cruel as it was, became my turning point. She thought it would silence me. Instead, it lit a fire. I wasn't just going to survive her rejection, I was going to use it. And soon, she would learn that the daughter she tried to erase was the one she should have feared all along. The night of the showcase in New York, I stood backstage, clutching the edges of my dress so tightly, my knuckles whitened. The room beyond was humming with voices, critics, gallery owners, collectors. It felt like the whole world was waiting. My work hung under bright spotlights no longer belonged just to me. It was about to speak for itself. When the doors opened, the crowd swarmed in. I tried to read their faces as they paused before each piece. Confusion, curiosity, then silence. That silence terrified me, but it also felt electric, like they were seeing something they couldn't put into words. The centerpiece was the hardest painting I had ever done, a fractured portrait of a mother and daughter. Their outlines blurred, their colors clashing like storm clouds. I had poured my soul into it, every wound turned into brushstrokes. And when I saw a critic stand before it, frowning at first, then slowly nodding with tears in her eyes, I knew this was my story finally being heard. By the end of the evening, I had sold 2 pieces, been offered a residency, and heard whispers that my name was making the rounds in circles I never imagined I'd reach. Strangers congratulated me, shook my hand, told me how my work spoke truth. But inside, all I could think was, would my mother even care? After the event, I found myself wandering the quiet streets of Manhattan Heels, clicking against the pavement, neon lights glowing above. For the first time in my life, I felt both powerful and utterly alone. That night in my hotel room, I opened my laptop and typed a long email to my mother. I told her about the showcase, the sales, the residency. For once, I allowed myself to write without begging, without apologizing. I ended it with, "I don't need you to be proud. I only need you to know I survived despite you." Then I hit send. Her reply came 2 days later, and it was only 6 words: "Hannah would never embarrass me publicly." That was the moment I stopped crying. It was like something inside me calcified. I realized she wasn't just blind to my worth, she chose not to see it. And if that was her choice, then I had one too, to stop handing her the power to define me. Still, the scars ran deep. At night, doubt crept in. What if she's right? What if I really am just embarrassing? But every morning I walked into the studio, and the canvases reminded me of who I was becoming. Here's the thing no one tells you. Freedom doesn't come in one triumphant moment. It comes in tiny, stubborn acts of defiance. Sending the email, hanging the painting, showing up for yourself even when no one else does. And maybe you felt it too. Maybe you've had someone in your life who dismissed your victories, who made you feel small on purpose. If that's you, let me know below. Sharing it here isn't weakness, it's resistance. That showcase wasn't the end of my story. It was the spark that would ignite something much larger. Because with every piece I created, more people listened. More voices joined in. And slowly the narrative shifted. I wasn't just Melissa, the daughter erased. I was Melissa, the artist who refused to vanish. But as I was stepping into that new identity, my mother was preparing her most vicious blow yet. And when it came, it would change everything. The news arrived on a quiet Wednesday afternoon. I was in the studio covered in paint when my phone buzzed with a message from a former neighbor back home. "Melissa, I thought you should know. Your mother's been telling people you fabricated your showcase, that the gallery pitied you, that none of it was real." I froze, brush still in my hand. For a moment, I thought it was some cruel prank. But as the messages kept rolling in screenshots of posts, whispered gossip, I realized it wasn't a joke. My mother was dismantling me from hundreds of miles away. It wasn't enough for her to reject me privately. Now she was dragging my name through the dirt in our hometown, rewriting my achievements as lies. And worse, Hannah chimed in, a Facebook post, public for the whole community to see Melissa, has always exaggerated. Please don't believe everything she says. Family matters should stay private. I felt the air leave my lungs. Betrayal was no longer just a wound, it was poison. I wanted to scream, to defend myself, to expose her cruelty. But another part of me whispered, if you respond, you'll only give them more ammunition. So instead, I poured it into my art. My next series became darker, sharper, twisted landscapes and figures caught mid-collapse. Critics called it raw, urgent, devastating. They didn't know they were looking straight into my grief. And yet, despite the pain, opportunities kept opening. Invitations to speak at panels, commissions from collectors. Every attempt my mother made to erase me only seemed to amplify my voice. But inside, I was unraveling. Nights alone in my apartment stretched into hours of replaying every cutting word she'd ever spoken. Here's the part I don't often admit I considered quitting. Packing it all away, disappearing before she could ruin me completely. The temptation to silence myself was strong. Because when the people who should love you most become your enemies, it's hard to believe the world will stand on your side. But then an email arrived. A woman from Ohio had seen photos of my work online. She wrote, "Your paintings make me feel less alone. My daughter and I left an abusive family last year, and when I saw your piece about the mother and daughter, I cried. Thank you for telling our story." I read that email 100 times. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift. My mother could smear my name in our town, but she couldn't silence the way my art spoke to strangers, to survivors, to people who needed it. So I made a vow, if she wanted to turn my voice into a battlefield, then I would fight not for her, not for revenge, but for every person who had ever been crushed under the weight of family betrayal. And maybe you've been there too. Maybe someone close tried to dim your light because they couldn't stand to see you shine. If you know that pain, share it below. I promise you'll find others here who get it. Because what I learned in that moment is this: blood may bind us, but truth is what sets us free. I didn't know it yet, but her campaign against me was about to push me into the spotlight in a way even she couldn't control. The lies she spread would backfire, And when they did, she'd realize she had unleashed something far more powerful than she ever intended. The storm truly broke when a journalist from an independent arts magazine reached out. She had seen my latest series online and wanted to feature me in a piece about artists confronting family trauma through their work. I hesitated. A part of me feared my mother would weaponize it even further, but another part whispered, "This is your chance to take back the narrative." So I agreed. The interview was raw. I spoke about the showcase, about growing up invisible, about my mother's attempts to erase me even as an adult. I didn't use her name, but I didn't soften the truth either. Silence protects abusers, I told the journalist. My work is the opposite of silence. When the article was published, it spread faster than I expected. Suddenly, strangers were tagging me on social media, sharing their own stories of betrayal and survival. Hashtags formed threads of people opening up about the cruelty they endured from those closest to them. My inbox filled with messages. Your story gave me courage to tell mine. And here's the twist: my mother's smear campaign had driven more eyes toward me. People looked up my name to see if the gossip was true, only to find my art, my words, my truth. In trying to bury me, she had built me a platform. But success comes with shadows. Hannah called one night, her voice tight with anger. "You're destroying this family," she hissed. "Do you know what people are saying about Mom? About us? You're airing dirty laundry for attention." I stayed silent for a long moment before answering. "Hannah, I didn't destroy this family. Mom did. I'm just refusing to keep her secret anymore." And for the first time in my life, I hung up before she could. Still, the guilt gnawed at me. Late at night, I'd scroll through the article's comment section, half expecting to see attacks, denials, mockery. But what I found instead were hundreds of voices saying, "Same here." Thank you, I thought I was alone. It made me wonder how many of us are carrying these invisible scars. How many of us have mothers or fathers who crushed us under the weight of their expectations or manipulations? And what would happen if we all refused to stay silent? That's when I decided my art wasn't just for me anymore. It was for them, for the quiet survivors, for the ones too afraid to speak. And maybe you're one of them. If you've ever been told your truth doesn't matter, I want you to know it does. Your voice matters here. Subscribe and stay with me, because the next part of this story is proof that even the deepest betrayal can turn into power. The journalist's piece opened doors I never imagined speaking, invitations, collaborations, even a podcast series. My world was expanding, but so was the resistance. My mother, enraged at losing control of the narrative, escalated her attacks in ways I couldn't have predicted. And when her next move came, it wasn't just gossip, it was war. I thought I had braced myself for anything, but nothing prepared me for the letter. It arrived in a plain envelope, no return address, just my name scrawled in sharp, familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I tore it open, already knowing it was from her. Inside was a message that dripped with venom. "You are dead to me. You were never my daughter. Stop dragging this family through your delusions, or I'll make sure you regret it." Beneath the words, she had clipped a copy of the article that featured me, circled in red ink, as if to brand me with shame. I sat on my floor, letter in my lap, staring at the twisted proof of how far she'd go. Until that moment, her cruelty had been corrosive but indirect whispers, gossip, manipulations. Now it was direct warfare. And suddenly, the stakes shifted. I called Hannah, hoping maybe, just maybe, she'd see how unhinged this had become. But Hannah sided with her as always. "She's just upset," she said. "You could still fix this if you apologize. Take the article down. Stop talking." My blood ran cold. "You want me to erase myself again?" I asked quietly. "I've been erasing myself my whole life. And look where it got me, broken, silent, invisible. No, never again." That night I made a choice. If she wanted war, then I would fight. Not with threats or vengeance, but with truth. I compiled every message, every rumor, every letter she'd sent. I filed them away, not as weapons, but as records, evidence. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about my story anymore. It was about showing others that you can stand your ground even against the people who gave you life. My therapist once told me, "Some parents give you roots, others try to cut your wings. You can't grow while chained to the ground." Those words echoed as I painted into the early morning hours, each stroke an act of defiance. My newest canvas wasn't subtle. It showed a tree with its roots hacked at, but above the cut branches burst skyward in flames of color. It was my rebellion on canvas. And then something remarkable happened. That painting went viral online. A stranger shared it with the caption, "This is how it feels to survive family betrayal." Thousands of likes, comments, shares. People from every corner of the world resonated with it. My pain had become a mirror for theirs. Of course my mother saw it. I heard through whispers she was furious that she raged about me at church about how ungrateful and sick I was. But here's the truth she couldn't grasp. Her hate was no longer my cage. It was my fuel. Still, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't scared. There were nights I bolted awake, hearing phantom knocks at the door, convinced she might actually try to follow through on her threats. But fear no longer owned me the way it once did. Every time doubt crept in, I looked at the letters, the messages from survivors, the photos of my art hung in strangers' homes, and I reminded myself I am not alone. And maybe that's what I want you to take from this part of my story. Maybe you've got someone who's been trying to convince you that your voice doesn't matter, someone who wants you erased. Hear me, their denial doesn't define you. The fact that you're still standing, still breathing, still fighting, that is proof enough. I didn't know it yet, but this escalation was only the beginning. My mother's next move wouldn't be letters or gossip. It would be something public. Something designed to break me once and for all. And when it came, it didn't just test me. It forced me to choose run or rise. It was a Sunday morning when the blow landed. I walked into my favorite coffee shop, the place I usually escaped to paint in my sketchbook, when I froze at the sight of a newspaper spread across a table. There it was, my face bold in print. The headline screamed, "Local artist accused of exploiting family trauma for fame." I snatched up a copy, my stomach twisting. The article was filled with quotes from family sources describing me as manipulative, unstable, desperate for attention. They had my mother's fingerprints all over them, though her name was carefully left out. And then buried halfway down was the cruelest line: even her own sister has distanced herself, citing the damage caused by these fabricated stories. My hands shook so badly the paper tore. Hannah, she had gone public. I stumbled outside the world, tilting. Passers-by brushed past me oblivious, but I felt exposed, naked, as if every eye could now see the article stamped across my skin. I wanted to vanish, to crawl back into the silence my mother had always demanded. But then my phone buzzed. A message notification. "Hey, don't listen to that garbage. We believe you." Another "Your work saved me when I was at my lowest. Don't stop now." Within minutes, my inbox was filling again. For every headline, there were a dozen voices rising to defend me. And in that moment, I realized something life-altering. My mother might control the local gossip, but she no longer controlled my narrative. Not anymore. The article wasn't a death sentence. It was gasoline on a fire already burning. Still, the pain cut deep. That night, I sat in my studio staring at a blank canvas. My chest ached with betrayal, not just from my mother, but from Hannah. I replayed every memory of us as kids, the whispered secrets before bed, the promises to always have each other's back. Now she had chosen to stand beside the very person who had broken me. Tears blurred my vision, dripping onto the white surface before me. But instead of wiping them away, I picked up my brush. I painted the newspaper headline distorted and unraveling into ashes. I painted a faceless figure with scissors trying to cut a ribbon that bound two hands together. And above it all, I painted flames not of destruction, but of rebirth. That piece became my answer to their smear campaign. When I posted it online, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of people shared it with captions like, "This is me too, and they can't erase us." The irony was sharp in trying to silence me. My mother and Hannah had amplified my voice more than ever. But with every surge of attention came a new kind of fear. What if they escalated again? What if this time it wasn't just words in a newspaper? I remember looking into the camera during a late-night live stream and saying, maybe my story isn't about winning my mother's love. Maybe it's about surviving without it. The chat exploded with support, people flooding in with their own confessions. And I knew this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was ours. But the battle wasn't over. Because the very next week, my mother made her boldest move yet. She didn't just try to ruin me with words. She tried to erase me legally. And that's where everything changed. I had always believed her cruelty would remain confined to words, whispers, and gossip. But I was wrong. A thick envelope arrived one morning delivered by certified mail. Inside was a notice that chilled me to the bone. She had filed for legal guardianship over me. Guardianship over a grown woman in her 30s. The claim was outrageous, dripping with lies. According to her petition, I was mentally unfit to manage my finances and susceptible to delusions that endangered the family's reputation. She had attached pages of so-called evidence-twisted versions of my past struggles, cherry-picked quotes from therapy journals I'd once left behind, and of course clippings of the viral articles about me. I remember sitting on my couch, clutching those papers, my pulse hammering. This wasn't just manipulation anymore, it was an attempt to own me. If the court granted her request, I could lose my autonomy, my bank accounts, my art, my freedom. At first, fear nearly drowned me. I thought about running, disappearing, changing my name. But then another feeling rose, anger, sharp and undeniable. After everything, she still believed she had the right to cage me. And this time I wouldn't let her. I called a lawyer the next morning, one recommended by a friend in the art community. When I sat across from her, voice trembling, she listened intently. "What she's trying to do," the lawyer said firmly, "is abuse the system. But don't worry, you have a strong case." We gathered everything, the threatening letters, the smear articles, the messages of support from strangers who could attest to my mental clarity through my art and live streams. It was exhausting dredging it all up again, but for once I felt like I was fighting with weapons of truth, not just survival. Hannah, of course, sided with her. I saw her name listed in the petition as a supporting witness. Reading it was like being stabbed twice, once by my mother's hand and then again by my sister's. They weren't just trying to silence me anymore, they were trying to erase me legally, to brand me incapable of living my own life. The hearing date was set for a month later. Every night leading up to it, I painted. My canvases became my battle cries, trees breaking through concrete, birds ripping through nets, women standing tall despite the shadows gripping their ankles. Each piece was a reminder I am not powerless. But beneath the defiance there was still terror. What if the judge believed them? What if I lost everything I had clawed back from the wreckage of their control? One night I whispered to myself in the dark, "If they take my freedom, they take my art. And if they take my art, they take me." And then came the twist I never saw coming. A journalist who had written about me months earlier reached out after hearing about the guardianship petition. "If you're willing," she said, "we want to cover this. Not as gossip, but as a story about systemic abuse of power." For the first time, I realized my fight wasn't just mine. My case could shine a light on how toxic families exploit legal loopholes to control adults. So I agreed. And as the story spread, I could feel the ground shifting. The narrative my mother had tried to strangle me with was slipping from her hands. But I also knew this publicity came with risk. If she had already escalated this far, how much further would she go now that the world was watching? The court battle was looming, and with it the most decisive confrontation of my life. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a place where lives were rewritten with signatures and stamps. As I walked through the heavy glass doors on the morning of my hearing, my knees nearly buckled. My mother was already inside, flanked by Hannah. They both wore the same smug expressions, as though victory was inevitable. For a moment, the urge to turn around and flee was overwhelming. But then I caught sight of the lawyer walking beside me, steady and unshaken. "You're not alone," she whispered. And she was right. Behind me sat several friends from my art community, people who had traveled hours to be here. Even strangers who had followed my story online showed up holding small signs that read, "Let her live free." Inside the courtroom, the tension was electric. My mother's attorney launched, first painting me as unstable, prone to delusions, incapable of handling money or making decisions. Every word felt like a dagger, and Hannah nodded solemnly along her betrayal, cutting deeper than any lawyer's spin. But when it was our turn, my lawyer didn't just defend me, she dismantled their narrative piece by piece. She presented evidence of my thriving art business, proof of my income contracts with galleries. She played clips from my live streams showing thousands of viewers engaging with me clearly, coherently. She even introduced testimony from a therapist who confirmed I was in full control of my mental health. The turning point came when we presented the letters my mother had sent, the ones dripping with threats and coercion. Watching the judge's face harden as he read them was a moment I'll never forget. It was as if the curtain had finally been pulled back, revealing the cruelty she had hidden for years. Still, the most haunting part came when I was called to the stand. My hands trembled as I raised them, swearing to tell the truth. I looked across the room, locking eyes with my mother. For the first time, I didn't see power in her gaze, I saw desperation. "I am not broken," I said, my voice quivering at first, then growing stronger. "I am not unstable. What I am is a daughter who has endured years of control threats and manipulation. This petition isn't about my welfare, it's about silencing me, about keeping me in chains so she never has to face her own reflection." The courtroom was silent. I could feel my heart hammering, but I didn't falter. I deserve the right to live free, to create, to breathe without someone else's permission. And if that makes me rebellious in her eyes, so be it, because I would rather be free and alone than chained and surrounded. By the time I stepped down, I noticed something astonishing. Hannah couldn't meet my eyes anymore. For a flicker of a moment, guilt shadowed her face. The judge announced that his decision would be delivered in writing within 2 weeks. The gavel came down, and just like that, the most important battle of my life was hanging in the balance. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt louder, every thought heavier. But beneath the anxiety, there was also a spark of pride. For the first time, I had stood my ground, not in whispers, not in paint, but in words that could never be taken back. And even though the verdict hadn't been read, I sensed a shift. No matter what came next, I had spoken the truth out loud. And once spoken truth has a way of echoing far beyond the walls meant to contain it. Yet deep inside, a question lingered, gnawing at me. If my mother could go this far, what would she do when the ruling didn't go her way? The war wasn't over. It was only changing shape. The 2-week wait felt like an eternity. Every morning I checked my email, obsessively convinced that the verdict had been sent, but the system was keeping me in suspense on purpose. My studio, once my sanctuary, became a prison of anticipation. Each brushstroke I laid on the canvas was shaky, distracted by the thought of what was to come. Finally, the day arrived. A thick envelope stamped, and official sat on my kitchen counter. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The judge had ruled in my favor, guardianship denied. My mother's petition had been dismissed. The reasoning was meticulous, citing evidence of my financial independence, mental stability, and the clear manipulation attempts documented in the letters, messages, and testimony presented. For the first time in decades, a legal authority had validated what I had always known: I was competent, I was capable, and I was free. I sank into my chair, overwhelmed. Relief, triumph, and disbelief collided inside me. I felt like I had been underwater for years, finally surfacing to a world where I could breathe fully. But the victory was bittersweet. The battle had left scars, not only from my mother's cruelty, but from my sister's complicity. Hannah had not only enabled her mother's schemes, but had actively participated in trying to erase me. For a moment, I wondered if our relationship would ever recover. The next few weeks were a blur of media requests, interviews, and supportive messages from strangers who had followed my journey. Each conversation reminded me that I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was a symbol for everyone who had ever been silenced by a family member, trapped in guilt or fear, struggling to assert their autonomy. And yet, the shadow of my mother lingered. Even though she had lost in court, I could feel her eyes on me from afar. Her attempts to control, to manipulate, didn't end simply because a legal document said so. I realized then that my freedom wouldn't come from a gavel or a verdict. It would come from the boundaries I set for myself moving forward. So I began constructing those boundaries carefully. I limited direct communication, redirecting her attempts at manipulation through my lawyer. I updated my online presence, securing privacy and control over my digital footprint. I organized my finances so that her interference was impossible. For the first time, I felt truly sovereign over my life. Amid all this, I also began to rebuild my connection with Hannah. She reached out tentatively, clearly shaken by the legal battle and its revelations. We started with short emails discussing neutral topics and slowly progressed to more personal conversations. I made it clear that trust would take time and that I would not tolerate any further manipulation. To my surprise, she responded with honesty and remorse. She admitted she hadn't fully understood the extent of our mother's abuse and expressed a desire to redefine our relationship. It was fragile, tentative, but it was real. Meanwhile, my mother remained a complex figure. She sent letters that were technically compliant, but filled with veiled guilt and non-apology apologies. She wrote about her health, the house, and the garden club, but never acknowledged the harm she had caused. Reading them, I realized that forgiveness didn't mean condoning her behavior. It meant releasing the power she had over me. And through all of this, my art continued to flourish. Paintings born from struggle and triumph found homes across the country. I was invited to curate an exhibit focused on resilience and autonomy, a theme that mirrored my own journey. Teaching workshops, mentoring young artists, and sharing my story became a source of empowerment, both for myself and for those I touched. Looking back, the legal victory was significant, but the true triumph lay in the reclamation of my life. It wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about finally existing on my terms, free from fear, guilt, or obligation. And for anyone watching this wondering if they have the courage to reclaim their own life, know this freedom doesn't arrive in a single dramatic moment. It is built day by day, decision by decision, brushstroke by brushstroke. You reclaim yourself by choosing your boundaries, asserting your truth, and refusing to allow others to define your worth. The weeks after the verdict were unlike anything I had ever experienced. There was a strange mix of exhilaration and emptiness, like standing on the edge of a cliff after a storm had passed. I was free, legally, emotionally, and financially, but freedom came with its own set of challenges. For decades, I had been defined by my mother's approval, or more accurately, her disapproval. Suddenly, I was a blank canvas with no one dictating the colors, the lines, or the direction. I started by reclaiming my space. My studio, once a refuge, became a true sanctuary. Walls that had been painted in muted tones to appease her taste were now bold alive with color. Every brushstroke, every sculpture, every line I drew became a declaration of self. It was my rebellion, but also my therapy. In the silence of creation, I began to hear my own voice for the first time in years. Hannah and I began to cautiously rebuild our sisterhood. She admitted with humility and tears that she had allowed herself to be complicit for far too long. She had followed my mother's script, and only in seeing the court documents, the letters, and the community's reaction did she understand the magnitude of her inaction. Slowly, through handwritten letters and carefully moderated video calls, we started to reconnect not as roles assigned by our mother, but as sisters choosing to know one another on our own terms. Yet my mother's presence lingered not in proximity, but in memory. Her letters, though compliant with the court's ruling, were passive-aggressive, filled with guilt traps and thinly veiled criticisms. They were reminders that freedom wasn't about erasing the past, it was about acknowledging it and refusing to let it dictate the future. I learned to read her letters critically, to separate truth from manipulation, and to respond only when necessary. In that process, I realized that setting boundaries wasn't a betrayal, it was an act of self-preservation. Meanwhile, my art career flourished in ways I had never anticipated. Galleries began reaching out for exhibitions centered around resilience, autonomy, and self-discovery. Workshops, public speaking engagements, and collaborations offered me a platform not only to share my work, but to inspire others who had faced similar familial control. Each exhibition, each class became an affirmation of my agency, a visible, tangible testament that I was no longer defined by someone else's expectations. During this time, I discovered the importance of community. Friends, colleagues, and fellow survivors became my chosen family. People like Diane, the cafe owner, who had welcomed me without question, and other artists in Harbor Cove became constants in a world I could now navigate freely. These relationships, grounded in mutual respect and shared growth, taught me the value of connection that was untainted by fear or obligation. It was in these moments, creating mentoring and connecting, that I realized the depth of what I had reclaimed, my autonomy. The years of manipulation and control had been attempts to make me smaller, to diminish my presence. But now, every choice I made, every boundary I upheld, every creative act was a reclamation of space, of identity, of life lived on my terms. Looking back, I understood the true power of disappearance, not as abandonment, but as self-liberation. By stepping away from the toxic dynamics of my family, I created the conditions necessary for authentic growth. I had not simply escaped. I had constructed a life that was intentional, empowered, and mine. And for anyone watching this story unfold, the lesson is clear: liberation is possible. You are allowed to step away from those who diminish you. You are allowed to prioritize your well-being. You are allowed to rewrite the narrative of your life. Now, as I prepare to share this journey with you fully, I encourage you to consider your own story. What boundaries do you need to set? What relationships need reevaluation? And perhaps most importantly, where in your life could you reclaim your voice, your agency, and your freedom? If this story resonates with you, don't forget to check out the next video where I share practical steps to build a life unbound by toxic family expectations. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. Trust me, you'll want to see how these strategies helped me not just survive, but thrive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the bay, I sat on the porch of my little Harbor Cove cottage and let myself breathe fully for the first time in decades. The weight that had pressed on my chest, the relentless pressure to be perfect, to please, to survive my mother's unyielding expectations, had lifted. For the first time, I wasn't running from anyone or anything. I was finally present in my own life. I thought of the years I had lost, of the birthdays, graduations, and milestones spent shrinking, apologizing silently, or disappearing into the background. And yet, in that reflection, I didn't feel regret as I might have once. Instead, I felt pride. Pride that I had chosen myself, that I had confronted the lies and manipulation head-on, and that I had built a life rooted in truth, creativity, and freedom. In Harbor Cove, I found more than safety. I found authenticity. My art flourished, my friendships deepened, and even my relationship with Hannah transformed, cautiously evolving into one of mutual respect and understanding. And though my mother remained a figure from my past, I no longer feared her or the echoes of her control. I had learned that boundaries were not walls. They were the very scaffolding that allowed me to grow. I penned a letter to myself, a final acknowledgement of the journey you survived. You reclaimed your voice. You chose yourself when it mattered most. Be proud. Keep moving forward, one day at a time, one choice at a time. Sometimes the most difficult endings are the beginnings we need. By stepping away from a relationship that diminished me, I discovered not loss, but liberation. And as stars began to sprinkle across the night sky, I smiled, knowing that the woman who had fled Connecticut in pain and confusion a year ago was not the same woman now watching the Pacific shimmer in moonlight. I had disappeared to save myself, and in that disappearance I had finally learned to fully appear free, empowered, and authentically alive.